A 31-year-old woman went looking for solitude on a solo trek through Colorado's high country, but instead, she was swallowed by the immense wilderness. When a sprawling search turned up nothing, her trail vanished for 18 months, leaving behind the haunting question of how such a skilled outdoors woman could simply disappear. The first whisper of an answer emerged from the discovery of her decaying gear, and a memory card concealed within her hiking shoe proved she had left a final, desperate transmission from the edge of oblivion. At 8 o'clock on the morning of September 14, 2015, the Denver Police Department's briefing for its new command staff began with rigid precision. It was a room governed by punctuality and the profound weight of expectation, filled with officers about to assume roles of greater responsibility and scrutiny. When Officer Piper Crumbley's name was announced during the roll call, the only response was silence. In the regimented world of law enforcement, failing to appear for the first day of a command post was not just unprofessional, it was an immediate, jarring red flag. Piper, at 31, was renowned within the department for her meticulous planning, tactical acumen, and unwavering dependability. This promotion was a monumental achievement, the apex of years of relentless dedication. Her absence was instantly alarming. Early attempts to reach her were fruitless. Phone calls went straight to a voicemail that was already full, indicating her phone had been inactive or without service for a considerable time. Concern quickly mounted. Department officials reached out to her parents, Jarek and Emna Crumbley, and the information they shared transformed the worry from a missed meeting into a potential high-country emergency. They confirmed Piper had taken approved leave just before her promotion was to start. Anticipating the pressures of her new position, she had sought a period of decompression, a final reset before command duties consumed her life. Her chosen escape was both ambitious and typical for her. A solo, multi-day through hike deep within the formidable expanse of Rocky Mountain National Park. It was a journey intended to clear her mind, a final immersion in the high-altitude wilderness she cherished. The problem was glaring. She had been due to finish her hike 2 days earlier on September 12th. By the morning of the 14th, she was dangerously overdue, and her parents had received no word since she set off. Jarek and Emna were already wrestling with a growing dread. They were keenly aware of their daughter's abilities. Piper was not merely a seasoned hiker at home in Colorado's demanding terrain. She was also a trained police officer. She understood risk management, navigation, and wilderness survival far better than most. For her to vanish without a trace pointed to something much more grave than getting lost or sustaining a minor injury. If Piper was missing, some external force had to be involved. By noon on September 14th, Piper Crumbley was officially listed as a missing person. The urgency was electric. This was not a case of a misplaced tourist. This was one of their own. The investigation commenced at her last known point. Park rangers swiftly found Piper's vehicle, locked and parked at the trailhead designated on her backcountry permit. The car was undisturbed, offering no immediate clues as it sat silently, a stark monument to where her journey began, while the surrounding peaks loomed overhead, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Investigators pieced together a timeline from her last confirmed contact, a brief text message sent to her mother 5 days prior, on the morning of September 9th. Sent from near the park entrance, it stated she was beginning her ascent as planned and would soon lose cell service. After that message, her digital footprint ceased. Piper Crumbley had shouldered her pack and walked into the vastness of the Rockies, seemingly dissolving into the thin mountain air. The response to Piper Crumbley's disappearance was immediate and immense. Rocky Mountain National Park is a staggering wilderness, covering over 415 square miles of some of the most rugged high-altitude terrain in the nation. It is a realm of towering summits, deep-shadowed canyons, and weather that can shift from serene to lethal in minutes. Finding a single person in such an environment is a monumental task, a desperate race against the clock and the elements. The initial search was concentrated on the route Piper had filed with the Park Service, a challenging multi-day loop across well-known passes. By the morning of September 15th, the park was a hive of activity. Rangers, specialized search and rescue teams, volunteers, and Denver PD officers converged, setting up a command post near the trailhead. The atmosphere was one of grim focus, the air buzzing with helicopter rotors and the crackle of radios. The aerial search was relentless, with pilots battling treacherous winds to conduct low-level grid searches, their eyes scanning the alpine tundra and dense forests for any flash of unnatural color. On the ground, K-9 units were deployed, hoping to find a scent trail before it was erased. Searchers pushed themselves to their physical limits, fighting altitude sickness and the emotional burden of looking for a colleague. They knew that if Piper were injured, she possessed the training to signal for help and make herself visible. Yet day after day, the teams returned, exhausted and with nothing to report. Jarek and Emna arrived at the command center, their faces masks of anguish. They gave investigators detailed lists of Piper's equipment, down to the brand of her hiking shoes. They spoke of her meticulous habits and cautious nature, clinging to the hope that her skills would sustain her until she was found. Simultaneously, detectives in Denver began the necessary background work, scrutinizing Piper's life for any hidden stressors or conflicts. They reviewed her recent cases for any disgruntled individuals, examined her finances, and combed through her personal relationships. The search yielded nothing. Piper's life appeared stable, with no signs of distress or unusual activity. The investigation confirmed what her family already knew. The answer lay somewhere in the mountains. Days bled into a week. The intensive search of her planned route produced no results. No discarded gear, no sign of a campsite, no proof she had even made it past the first day's climb. It was confounding. The wilderness held its silence. It was during this period of frustration that investigators stumbled upon a strange detail that radically altered the search. While reviewing Piper's notes and recent purchases, they found a clerical copy of a requisition form from a specialized outfitter in Boulder. Dated 3 weeks before her trip, it detailed an order for high-end technical ice climbing equipment, crampons, ice axes, and ropes designed for glacial travel. This gear was far more advanced than anything needed for her filed itinerary. The copy, left among her trip-planning documents, ignited a new, alarming theory. Had Piper been planning a secret, far more dangerous detour? Was her official route a misdirection? Investigators knew Piper was driven to push her limits. The requisition suggested she had contemplated a highly technical ascent into one of the park's remote and treacherous ice fields. It was a compelling story. A skilled officer seeking one last extreme challenge before a desk-bound promotion. If she had fallen into a crevasse or become trapped on a glacier, the odds of finding her were slim. This lead felt tangible, a behavioral clue that seemed to fit Piper's personality. Authorities made the difficult decision to divert significant resources to this new possibility. The operation shifted from a standard wilderness search to a high-risk technical rescue mission. Specialized alpine teams trained in glacial travel were deployed to remote areas, far from any established trails, characterized by unstable ice and the constant threat of avalanche. The search in the ice fields was grueling and perilous. The environment was a stark world of blinding white and deep shadow, the silence broken only by the wind and the crunch of crampons. Helicopters fought treacherous downdrafts to insert teams onto the glaciers, hovering precariously as observers scanned the monochrome landscape. On the ice, the roped-together teams moved with methodical tension, probing the snowpack for hidden crevasses where a fall would be fatal. They searched for days, battling the elements and the psychological toll of the hostile environment. The risks were immense. During one ascent, a localized avalanche roared down a gully, narrowly missing a search team. In another incident, a helicopter was forced into an emergency landing on a narrow ridge during a sudden whiteout. Despite the intensive effort and considerable danger, the ice fields yielded nothing. There was no trace of Piper Crumbly. The theory, while compelling, was a dead end, a discarded plan that had cost the investigation precious time and resources. During this intense focus on the high-altitude regions, the routine canvassing of local businesses continued at a lower priority. It was during this phase that a crucial oversight occurred. Investigators briefly considered the High Alpine Lodge, a remote seasonal establishment located slightly off the main trails. However, because it was not on Piper's planned route and seemed an unlikely detour for a solo hiker focused on covering distance, they dismissed the likelihood of her having visited. No one was dispatched to interview the staff. It was a seemingly minor decision made in the heat of a massive operation, but it meant a critical potential source of information remained untapped. As September ended, the weather in the Rockies began to turn. The first heavy snows blanketed the peaks and the temperatures plummeted. The window for active searching was closing rapidly. With no concrete leads and the terrain becoming increasingly hostile, the massive search operation was scaled back. The command center was disassembled, the volunteers sent home. For Jarek and Mana Crumbly, the silence was agonizing. The transition from active search to a missing person case felt like an admission of defeat. They refused to accept that their daughter had simply vanished. Throughout the winter of 2015 and into the spring thaw of 2016, they organized private searches, channeling their grief into action. But the mountains remained silent. A year passed, and the disappearance of Officer Piper Crumbly remained a complete, baffling mystery. March 2017. The high country of Rocky Mountain National Park was emerging from winter's grip, the landscape a stark mix of melting snowpack and exposed rock. 18 months had passed since Officer Piper Crumbly vanished. The case had gone cold, the initial urgency replaced by the dull, persistent ache of unanswered questions. Ellen Wilder was not thinking about missing persons. He was a field biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, tasked with documenting snowpack density and melt rates in the park's less-traveled forests. His work was meticulous and solitary, often taking him into dense, remote sections of the park. On the afternoon of March 21st, Ellen was working in a rugged area characterized by steep slopes and thick deadfall. As he scrambled over a large, uprooted tree, a flash of unnatural color caught his eye, partially hidden beneath a tangle of fallen branches. It was a grayish-blue synthetic fabric, a stark contrast to the organic tones of the forest floor. His first thought was irritation at discarded litter. Muttering about the disrespect for the pristine environment, he approached to pack it out. It was a small dome-style tent, but it was in a state of extreme decay. The fabric was tattered and stained, stiff with mold. It looked as if it had been blown there and left for a significant time. As Ellen began to bundle the ruined fabric, several items spilled out: degraded clothing, a fleece jacket, and a pair of hiking shoes nearby. The sight of these personal items shifted his perspective. This was not typical tourist trash. Then he found it, a waterlogged wallet tucked into the fleece pocket. Kneeling, he carefully opened the wallet, the material threatening to disintegrate. Inside, a photo on an ID card was obscured by water damage, a ghostly blur. He realized he was standing at a potential crime scene. He quickly retrieved his satellite phone and called the park ranger dispatch, his voice tight with urgency as he reported his GPS coordinates and the discovery. Park rangers and investigators from the FBI's Wilderness Crimes Unit arrived within hours, securing the area. The items were meticulously photographed before being transported to a forensic lab in Denver. At the lab, the process of cataloging the evidence began. A forensic technician examining the footwear picked up one of the hiking shoes. As part of the standard procedure, they needed to determine the size. The technician turned the shoe over, then reached inside to find the tag. As their gloved fingers probed the interior, they felt an unexpected resistance. Something hard was lodged beneath the insole, tucked deep into the heel. Carefully, they peeled back the worn insole. Tucked underneath, intentionally concealed, was a small black SD memory card. The discovery electrified the lab. In the context of a potential crime scene, a hidden memory card was a profound discovery, implying a conscious act to preserve information. Someone had hidden this card, hoping it would one day be found. After 18 months of silence, the mountains had finally offered a clue. Even before the card could be analyzed, the other items provided the first major breakthrough. The degraded ID, combined with the specific brands of gear, were definitively matched to the lists provided by Piper IS parents in 2015. The abandoned gear belonged to Piper Crumbly. The confirmation was devastating for her family, but ended the agonizing uncertainty. For investigators, the case shifted from a missing person inquiry to a potential homicide. All focus turned to the SD card. Piper was a trained police officer. She understood evidence preservation. Hiding the card inside her shoe was a deliberate, calculated act made under extreme duress. It was a final act of defiance. The card was rushed to a specialized digital forensics lab. The anticipation was palpable, but initial attempts to extract data failed. Exposure to 18 months of freeze-thaw cycles and moisture had caused severe degradation. The card was physically intact, but the data within was severely corrupted. The setback was crushing. The hope that had surged with the discovery began to fade. But the lab team refused to give up, escalating to advanced chip-off forensics, physically removing the memory chips to read them directly. The process was delicate, fraught with risk. During one procedure, a microscopic short circuit nearly fried the memory modules, a near-fatal error that underscored the fragility of the evidence. The team was forced to accept that any video or images were irretrievably lost. Weeks later, a partial breakthrough occurred. They could not reconstruct any visual files, but they managed to extract fragmented metadata from the card's file directory. Amidst the corrupted data, they identified a cluster containing GPS coordinates and a timestamp from September 2015. It was a digital breadcrumb, the first concrete evidence of Piper's movements after she started her hike. The location pinpointed by the coordinates was several miles from where the gear was found, in a remote, rugged area of the park known for its complex karst topography, a landscape of limestone formations, sinkholes, and caves. It was an area rarely visited by casual hikers. The discovery injected new urgency into the investigation. Authorities immediately organized an expedition. A specialized search and rescue tactical team was assembled, comprised of experienced mountaineers and cave rescue specialists. The approach to the coordinates was grueling, requiring them to navigate thick forests and ascend steep, unstable rock slopes. The coordinates led them to a narrow fissure in a rock face, partially obscured by vegetation, an unmarked cave entrance. The team entered cautiously, their headlamps cutting through the absolute darkness. The atmosphere was claustrophobic, the silence broken only by dripping water. Near the entrance, they made a discovery: an aluminum water bottle, partially buried in the dust. Jarek and Emna Crumbly were shown photographs and identified it immediately. It was one Piper always carried, a gift from her father. It was heartbreaking proof that she had been in this cave. However, forensic testing yielded no usable DNA or fingerprints. The damp environment had erased any trace evidence. The discovery was highly circumstantial. It placed Piper in the cave but didn't explain what happened there or why her gear was found miles away. The investigation had a new location but more questions than answers. Frustrated by the lack of definitive forensic evidence, investigators decided to revisit the initial stages of the search, hunting for any missed opportunities. They began a meticulous recanvass of every location near the park, including those previously dismissed. This time, they focused on the High Alpine Lodge. In October 2017, two investigators drove the winding mountain road to the rustic establishment. They spoke with Quila Brasher, the owner, a woman in her late 50s with sharp, observant eyes. They showed her a photograph of Piper. Quila's reaction was immediate. She recognized her, stating with certainty that the woman had visited the lodge in September 2015. The investigators felt a surge of adrenaline, but the next piece of information she provided transformed the case entirely. Piper had not been alone. Quila recalled her having lunch with a man, engaged in friendly, animated conversation. She described him as charming, physically fit, and appearing to be an experienced outdoorsman or local guide. The interaction seemed relaxed and comfortable. This revelation was a thunderbolt. For 2 years, the investigation had assumed Piper was solo. Now, a credible witness placed her with an unknown man just before she vanished. His failure to come forward was deeply suspicious. The investigators began preparing a composite sketch based on Quila's description. The next morning, however, the lead detective received a phone call. It was Quila Brasher, her voice hesitant. She explained that after looking at more photos of Piper online, she was now convinced she had made a mistake. She cited subtle differences in appearance, explaining that the passage of time had clouded her memory and she saw hundreds of similar-looking hikers each season. The retraction was unequivocal. The investigators were stunned. They pressed her, questioning her sudden change of heart, but Quila insisted she had simply been mistaken. Her regret seemed genuine. Faced with the witness's firm retraction and no other evidence, they were forced to downgrade the lead. The breakthrough that had seemed so close had evaporated, and the case stalled once more. By the spring of 2018, the investigation was completely cold. The case was filed away, seemingly destined to remain unsolved. It was during a routine cold case review that a new investigator, tasked with reviewing the exhaustive files, took an unconventional approach. Instead of focusing on the wilderness, he began a deep dive into Piper's professional background. He sifted through her police academy training records and noticed a specialized course she had taken years prior: Wilderness Tactical Operations. The course was taught by contracted civilian experts. This, he realized, was a potential link between Piper's professional life and the wilderness where she vanished. He began the painstaking process of cross-referencing the historical contractor list from the course with freelance search and rescue technicians known to operate in the Rocky Mountain National Park area. After weeks of data analysis, a match emerged. Von Gutz, a freelance SAR technician who used the alias Von, had occasionally consulted for law enforcement on wilderness skills. While he hadn't taught Piper directly, he was part of the expert community she had trained with. The connection was tenuous, but it was the first new lead in months. The investigator checked Von's physical description against the one Quila Brasher had initially provided. It was a loose alignment: fit, experienced, charismatic. A deep background check delivered an alarming result. Under his real name, Von Gutz had a significant criminal history. 15 years earlier, he had been convicted of aggravated robbery and served 10 years in prison. A convicted felon with specialized wilderness skills was operating under an alias as a SAR technician with a potential link to a missing police officer. The pieces began to click into place. The investigation mobilized immediately, but with extreme caution. Gutz was an expert survivalist, capable of disappearing if he felt threatened. They needed to apprehend him in the field. Investigators learned he was leading a private group deep in the park. A plan was devised. A specialized tactical team would intercept the group under the guise of a staged wildlife safety drill, an operation that would be filmed on body cams for evidentiary purposes. The operation launched in early June 2018. The tactical team tracked Gutz's group for 2 days, moving silently through the forest. The intercept occurred near a treacherous pass, a narrow ridge where escape was impossible. 2 undercover officers dressed as park officials approached, citing concerns about bear activity to check permits. Gutz, seemingly unconcerned, complied. The officers engaged him in conversation, slowly isolating him from his clients. The moment he was separated, their demeanor shifted. The friendly facade vanished, replaced by the cold professionalism of a tactical arrest. They informed him he was under arrest for the disappearance of Piper Crumbly. Goetz was stunned, his face paling as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. The arrest was executed swiftly and flawlessly. He was airlifted out of the park and transported directly to an interrogation room. There, investigators laid out the evidence, the training database connection, his alias, his criminal past, and the GPS data from the SD card. Then they played the audio. Through layers of static and wind, a distorted, frantic voice could be heard. It was Piper's. And in the recording, she clearly said his first name, Vaughn. Faced with the mounting evidence and the sound of his victim's voice from the grave, Goetz's facade shattered. He confessed. He recounted meeting Piper at the lodge, the immediate connection, and their decision to hike together. He took her to a favorite spot, a hidden cave system. There, feeling a sense of trust, he disclosed his criminal past. Piper's reaction, as a police officer, was one of immediate alarm. An argument erupted. He claimed she became agitated, and in the ensuing confrontation, he shoved her. She fell backward, her head striking a sharp rock. Believing he had killed a cop, he panicked and fled, leaving her for dead. He also admitted to making an anonymous, vaguely threatening call to the lodge owner after hearing investigators had been there, frightening her into recanting her statement. Investigators now believed that Piper had regained consciousness, severely injured. Her training kicking in, she recorded the audio and hid the SD card. Driven by a desperate will to survive, she managed to grab her tent and hike several miles before finally collapsing from her injuries. A final, intensive search was launched in the difficult terrain between the cave and the gear discovery site. This time, cadaver dogs led them to a deep sinkhole just off a spur of the cave system. There, they found Piper Crumbly's skeletal remains. Forensic analysis confirmed her identity and a severe head injury consistent with Goetz's account. Von Goetz pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. For Jarek and Emna Crumbly, the discovery of their daughter's remains brought a devastating, bittersweet closure, ending years of agonizing uncertainty. The case highlighted the terrible cost of missed leads, the intimidating power of silence, and the systemic blind spots that allowed a killer to hide in plain sight, concealed by the same wilderness that ultimately held the key to the truth.